All right, let's continue with the second video. If you go to slide 2 from your presentation, you see the following title. What is involved in phonetics? We have two components involved in phonetics. The first one is acoustic phonetics. The next one is articulatory phonetics. Acoustic phonetics refers to what we know as suprasegmental aspects. In other words, aspects or processes that apply at the word level, at the phrase level, or beyond that, namely stress, rhythm, intonation. Articulatory phonetics, on the other hand, has to do with describing how individual segments or sounds are produced or articulated in the vocal tract. This is precisely the main focus of this course. There are a few keywords which are technical and I would like for you to listen to carefully and repeat. Acoustic, acoustic phonetics, segmental, segmental, suprasegmentals, suprasegmentals, articulatory, articulatory phonetics, segments, articulate. Let's look at slide 3. How sounds are produced in the vocal tract. In order to begin comprehending how sounds are produced so as to familiarize ourselves with the vocal tract, we shall state that the production of speech sounds involves two cavities or sections that make up the vocal tract. First, the nasal cavity. Second, the oral cavity. And we will describe these more thoroughly later on. What happens in the phonation process starts in the lungs. Air from the lungs goes up the trachea into the larynx, at which point around here the air must pass between two small muscular folds. We will see a picture of this in just a second. If the vocal folds are apart, as they normally are when we breathe, the air from the lungs will have relatively free passage into the pharynx and the mouth, producing no vibration of the vocal folds. In contrast, if the vocal folds are adjusted so that there is only a narrow passage of air, in other words, if they are tensed, the air stream will cause vibration of the vocal folds or vocal cords, producing voiced sounds. On slide 4, we can see a picture of the phonation process. We can see that it starts really in the lungs, although the diaphragm pushes the lungs up and forces the air to be expelled up the larynx into the pharynx, and then the trachea to then be expelled either out our mouth or our nose, either out our vocal tract or our nasal tract. Okay? On slide 5, we see a not very good picture of the vocal folds, because what happens is this is a picture. So imagine if you were looking down into a tube, then this is the inside of this tube. And what you see is kind of like a little set of doors, like those swing doors that you would find in one of those cartoon bars that swing open and close, back and forth, back and forth. These little kind of doors are called vocal folds, and they are pushed open when the air is expelled out the lungs. What happens is that sounds produced when the vocal folds are vibrating because the air is pushing its way through these vocal folds, forcing its way out, are called voiced sounds. On the other hand, sounds produced with the vocal folds relaxed because the air is expelled without forcing its way through are called voiceless sounds. Voiced sounds produce vibration of the vocal folds. Voiceless sounds do not produce vibration of the vocal folds, like I said before. Slide 6 says the following. I am certain that you have never noticed this in speech production. In other words, the difference between voiced and voiceless sounds. However, even in Spanish and in all of the world's languages, we differentiate between voiced and voiceless sounds, just like we do in English. The best way to notice the difference between voiced and voiceless sounds is by producing two sets of sounds at tandem. For example, f and v. Practice saying f and then v to feel the difference between voiced and voiceless sounds. And I shall add something. I want you to take your hands up to your throat, put them right here, and then produce these two sounds at tandem. You can clearly see that whereas is voiceless because it produces no vibration of the vocal folds, is voiced because it does produce vibration of the vocal folds. Again, also, it's important to point out that and are produced exactly at the same place in the vocal tract. The only difference between and is that is voiceless, whereas is voiced. On slide 7, we start describing consonant sounds. Consonant sounds are formed by obstructing the air that comes up through the larynx from the lungs, like I just explained. In other words, a consonant sound by definition is a sound whereby the air coming up through the larynx is obstructed somehow. Consonant sounds can be described in three terms, in terms of three features. Every consonant sound has to be either voiced or voiceless, so consonants are described in terms of voiceless first of all. Second, they are described in terms of place of articulation. In other words, depending on where exactly each consonant sound is produced. Third, they're produced in terms of manner of articulation, meaning depending on how the air is expelled. This will all be described more thoroughly later on. What we need to remember is that consonant sounds are described in terms of three features: voicing, place of articulation, and manner of articulation. Let's look at slide 8. What is voicing? Like I just explained, voicing refers to whether or not the vocal folds vibrate while producing or announcing a segment. Sounds produced when the vocal folds are vibrating are referred to as, voiced sounds. Whereas sounds produced when the vocal folds are apart or relaxed and therefore there is no vibration of the vocal folds are referred to as voiceless sounds. Voiced, voiceless. I want you to say these two words with me, making sure that you pronounce the v. Voiced, voiceless. Again, voiced, voiceless. Let's look at the examples. We have sets of sounds which differ from one another simply in terms of voicing. For example, t, d, t, d. If you feel the position of your tongue when producing t and d, you see that it's exactly the same. The only difference between t and d is that t is voiceless, whereas d is voiced. 10, den, 10, den. The same happens with paw, ball, paw, ball. P, p, p is voiceless, whereas b is voiced, but they are produced exactly at the same place. Coat, coat, goat, goat, k, g, k, g. Again, k, and g are produced exactly at the same place of articulation, but k is voiceless, whereas g is voiced. Su, zoo, s, z. Same. S is voiceless, whereas z is clearly voiced. Feel, veal, f, v. F is voiceless, whereas v is voiced. T, d again. Toe and doe. Just like in the first set of examples, t is voiceless, whereas d is voiced. Okay? Once again, pairs of words that differ from one another by a single sound, such as ten and den or su and zoo, are referred to as minimal pairs. And we will talk a little bit more about this later on in the semester. We will finish this video with the next slide, slide 9, which contains a table of voiced and voiceless consonant sounds in English. Most of them, because we have some that are not here because they are variations of phonemes, and I will explain this later. So let's listen and repeat all the voiceless sounds in English. B, b. Again, if you're doing this right, you should have no vibration of the vocal folds. Therefore, I recommend that you put your hands up to your throat and say each sound. P, p, t, t, f, f, s, s, f, f, k, k, h, h, as in house, sh, sh, ch, ch. Now let's look at the voiced sounds. B, b, v, 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 z, z, v, v. Again, I apologize, it's twice. G, 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 o, y, as in yes, as in sing, j, as in pleasure, j, as in joke,